Settle in. This is Unintended Consequences, Episode 60. Today's case study: a story of good intentions and surprising results. Scared Straight sent at risk teens into prisons to be confronted by inmates in the hope that fear would keep them out of trouble. And later studies found the programs raised their odds of offending. In September 1978, 17-year-old Anthony sat on a metal folding chair inside Rahway State Prison. The room was the sort of institutional space where every sound echoed off cinder block walls and metal doors. A group of convicted murderers and armed robbers stood close enough that their voices filled the space directly in front of him. They described in concrete detail the physical consequences that would follow if Anthony ended up behind those same walls. The session itself ran for 3 full hours without a break. When Anthony walked out of the building that afternoon, he carried the memory of that intensity with him. Within the next 2 years, however, the official record showed he had collected more juvenile offenses than he had accumulated before the visit ever took place. The program responsible for placing him in that chair had been created with the explicit hope that the opposite would occur. The Juvenile Awareness Program at Rahway began in 1976 when members of the Lifers Group decided to act. These were men already serving long sentences who had noticed a steady stream of younger arrivals on the cell blocks. They reasoned that if they could reach boys earlier, before the first serious arrest, they might interrupt the pattern they saw repeating. Their approach rested on a simple calculation that many adults at the time accepted without question. Adolescents often lacked any direct picture of what daily life inside a maximum security facility actually involved. A single afternoon of unfiltered testimony, the lifers believed, could supply that missing picture and generate an emotional response strong enough to outweigh whatever attractions delinquency held. New Jersey officials and the local juvenile courts treated the sessions as an inexpensive addition to the probation services already in place. When documentary filmmaker Arnold Shapiro later filmed one of those sessions for the 1978 television special Scared Straight, the inmates continued to describe their purpose in exactly those terms. They wanted to stop the next group of boys from walking the same path they had taken. After the broadcast received an Academy Award and reached an estimated 15 million viewers, the same basic format spread quickly. Within 5 years, comparable programs were operating in more than 30 states and in several other countries. Juvenile courts in California, Michigan, and Illinois began requiring attendance as one of the standard conditions attached to probation orders. Supporters pointed to the statements participants made immediately after the sessions, when many said they never wanted to see the inside of a prison again. In 1980, the U.S. Department of Justice issued written guidelines that other facilities could follow if they wished to copy the confrontational style. A small number of researchers, among them faculty at Rutgers University, raised the possibility that the very intensity of the confrontation might produce the opposite of deterrence. Those questions, however, were largely set aside while the programs continued to expand. A 2000 Campbell collaboration systematic review later gathered 9 randomized and quasi-randomized evaluations that had been completed between 1978 and 1992. When the results were combined, the youths who had been assigned to Scared Straight-style programs showed higher rates of later offending than the youths assigned to the control conditions. The average increase in the odds of delinquency came to roughly 28%. Researchers traced that increase to several connected processes rather than to any single cause. The first involved psychological reactance. The direct, shouted challenge to a teenager's sense of autonomy often prompted an immediate internal response of, "You cannot tell me what to do." That response, in turn, could translate into continued or even increased delinquent acts as a way of reasserting choice. The second process concerned status. Once the teens returned to their own neighborhoods, some found that describing the prison visit became a way to demonstrate toughness rather than a reason to avoid further trouble. The third process was normalization. Hearing the daily routines, the slang, and the physical layout described in detail made the idea of future incarceration feel less remote and therefore less frightening. Follow-up interviews from the New Jersey and Illinois studies captured participants saying after the initial shouting stopped that the experience had not been as bad as they had expected. These separate effects did not cancel one another out. Instead, official arrest records showed the difference between the treatment group and the control group growing larger across the 18 months that followed the intervention. By the mid-1990s, several large jurisdictions had already stopped requiring participation after their own internal reviews reached conclusions similar to the later Campbell findings. In 1999, the U.S. Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention issued formal guidance that discouraged the use of confrontational deterrence programs. A few sites kept voluntary versions that used milder language and less direct confrontation. Yet the number of young people sent to those sessions declined sharply. No large-scale return of the original model has taken place inside the United States since that period. Isolated programs using comparable ideas still appear from time to time in parts of Europe and Australia, usually under different names. The fact that the original approach remains easy to recall, even after the data became available, shows how strongly and emotionally direct intervention can continue to shape public thinking long after controlled comparisons have pointed in another direction. Interventions that feel immediately satisfying to both deliverers and audiences are precisely the ones that require the most rigorous testing before widespread adoption. When an approach relies on strong emotional arousal, it can activate psychological processes, reactants, status signaling, normalization, that run counter to the intended direction of change. Decision makers today can apply the same standard to current proposals in juvenile justice, education, or public health. Ask not only whether the logic is intuitive, but whether a controlled comparison has measured the actual behavioral outcome. The question remains open for any new program that promises to wake kids up through fear or shock. That's the case for today. The lessons tend to travel further when you share them, so send this one to someone who'd find it useful, and subscribe wherever you're listening. See you tomorrow. And if you'd rather watch than listen, find us on YouTube at NARA Network, links in the show notes. And before you go, this show is part of the NARA Network, a family of daily podcasts on tech, science, and markets, each one a short, sharp briefing you can finish on the commute. If today earned its place in your feed, here's your next listen. Models and Agents, your daily briefing on AI models and agents. Find every show free at naranetwork.com. New to the network, naranetwork.com/start-here picks the right daily briefing for you in about 2 minutes. This episode used AI voice synthesis of my voice. Editorial selection and analysis are my own.